August. Good morning, I'm Dilip Thakore, editor of EducationWorld.
Good morning, I'm Summiya Yasmeen, managing editor.
According to a report of the Standing Committee of Parliament on Education, 240 million children have not availed any education in the past 1 year.
Yes. And 77% of school children have had no access to online education.
These are terrible figures, and in fact, it's tantamount to an emergency in Indian education. And a month ago, we had written a cover story why schools should start right now.
Yes, we had written a pioneering cover story where we had made a strong case for reopening schools immediately.
Yes, and that was our June issue, if I recall correctly. And in this issue of Education World, that's the August issue, we've again focused on this very same subject, but in that we profiled 30 leaders, principals, promoters, and education leaders who have managed to weather the pandemic tsunami and provide some kind of online education to their children.
In our editorial section this month, we've written a edit on India's fast hollowing democracy.
Yes, and we've concentrated on the law and order situation and the huge backlog of cases in the Supreme Court. But in our lead edit, we've also focused on the 30 years of liberalization and deregulation of the Indian economy in 1991.
Yes.
A lot of reports in the press indicate that we've come a long way since 1991, which is true. But on the other hand, that's not a correct measurement. We have to look at what other countries have done in the past 30 years. And I regret to inform our listeners and readers that, in 1978, China and India were on a par in terms of GDP per capita. Today, China's GDP is $16 trillion. Ours is $3 trillion. Their per capita income is 10,000 rupees, $10,000, and ours is only $2,000. Plus, there's so much inequality in India, which is much more than in China. So, there's also nothing to be very proud about in our liberalization report.
Yes. And in our education news section this time, we have a very interesting education news from the major states. So from Delhi, we've covered the appointment of Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan as the new education minister, and why we hope that it should bode well for Indian education. And in Maharashtra, we talk about how the state government has passed an order where it's asked private schools to cut 15% of tuition fees for the new academic year 21-22. And the response of schools and parents to this. And in Karnataka also, there's quite a disturbing study which says that 60,000 children have dropped out of 250 private schools. So this was a survey which was conducted only among 250 private schools. So if you take it, in Karnataka hosts about 21,000 unaided private schools. So across these schools, the number would be much larger. And all this is because of the pandemic-induced stress to the economy.
Yes.
Very interesting news also from West Bengal on Mamata Banerjee's education plans. Another interesting news from Tamil Nadu on what the Tamil Nadu High Court has ruled in a fees dispute.
Yes. In our institutional profile section, we've covered the school in Bombay, top highly ranked school in Bombay, which is the NL Dalmia School in Thane. It was promoted in 1991 by businessman philanthropist Niranjan Dalmia, and is ranked among the top dozen co-ed day schools of Maharashtra in the Education World India School Rankings 2021.
Very interesting expert comment written by Professor Geeta Kingdon, the president of City Montessori School, and also a lecturer at University of London.
She argues a very good, very excellent piece. She argues that in any way the state governments are spending more than that, sometimes 4,000 rupees per child in government schools where no learning happens. Why can't that same money be given to parents so they can choose schools of their choice for their children?
And in our cover story, we've done a story where we profiled 30 edu leaders weathering the COVID tsunami, wherein this time we've done it very differently. We've covered a spectrum of leaders across the board of the education sector. So we have high-end international school leaders, we have university leaders, we have school principals of remote tribal schools in Kerala.
Yes, I think the important point to notice is not only the so-called rich schools which are able to provide online education, but there are school leaders of poor schools, even government schools, who are doing highly innovative ways of reaching learning to their children and maintaining learning continuity. Yes. So there are 30 such people across a wide section of educators who are profiled in this, and they provide a mine of information on how to maintain learning continuity during the pandemic, which right now shows no sign of easing up.
Yeah, no, and it's also a lesson in innovation and why the nation owes a debt of gratitude. We are soon approaching Teachers' Day. Why our nation owes a debt of gratitude to our teachers who have, despite pandemic restrictions, despite lockdowns, have done whatever they could, put the best foot forward to maintain learning continuity of children.
Yes, some of our teachers, not all of them. And as usual in the international news section also, unlike any other publication in India, we offer 4 pages of international news. It's very important, I think, for our listeners, policy formulators and others to know what other people are doing in education. And if you read these pages, you'll find that there's a lot of high-level thinking going into managing the pandemic. Exams, the first story is in the United Kingdom where they're looking at imminent examination research, reform. And then there's research in Germany. Then in China, coaching institutes, that's been all over the Indian papers, also have been, they've been cut to size. Whereas in India, they're flourishing for school children. So, and there's a story also from India, where the Times, higher education, I think they talk about there are huge number of vacancies in India's universities. This is not a thing that we see in the Indian media. They don't seem to bother about it.
Yes, and while we are also in India talking about school reopening, there's a big debate on school reopening. There's a very interesting story on Colombia, how they are tackling this whole issue of school reopening and how teachers unions are lobbying against reopening of schools. It's a very interesting story.
It's a very interesting story because the teachers' unions are very powerful in South America, and likewise, and it's not very well known, in the states of India. In India's states, the unions are very powerful and they're blocking a lot of reforms.
Yes.
This story is worth reading.
Yes. And we have a very interesting interview this time done with Dr. Ramchandra Guha, where he talks about a wide range of issues, starting from pre-independence India, about Gandhi, about Nehru, about Patel, and most importantly also addresses issues of education and social change, where he very interestingly says that one of Nehru's greatest failures was to ignore primary education.
You don't say one-off, he says it was his greatest failure.
Yes.
To ignore primary education, and he also touches on, we asked him questions about economic policies, the road to socialism that we took, and he makes a very interesting observation that at that time it was the fashion for the state to intervene in economic development, but we hung on to that model for too long.
Yes, and very interesting book reviews again, where the first book reviewed is The Age of Pandemics, where the book talks about how India was the epicenter of pandemics in the 18th and 19th century. The cholera and the influenza pandemics wiped out an estimated 40 million people in India.
Yes, but despite this, and this is the point of the book written by Professor Chinmay Tumbe of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. The point is, we have not learnt anything from the experience of the previous pandemic. And indeed, the point that he makes is that all reference to the history of pandemics that India has suffered is virtually wiped out in our history textbooks.
Yes.
And that's one of the great conundrums of why. Why is there no reporting?
We have another interesting, as usual, our back page, gossip page, Postscript, where a lot of people have been.
Well, I won't call it a gossip page, but it's something off the beaten track, where we talk about numerous subjects like relating to industry, the exit of the retirement of Rahul Bajaj, whom I, as editor of Business India and Business World, knew very well.
Yes, it's a very interesting.
The departure, unlamented departure of our former Education Minister,
Dr. Thakore.
Yes, and some other news from Bombay House.
Yes. So all in all, it's a very interesting issue packed with information and also addressing some very important topical and relevant educational issues, which as educators and parents we must be talking about and debating in this country.
Yes.
And before we say goodbye, a word about our latest ParentsWorld cover story, where we've done a very interesting story on the best parenting apps 2021. As you know, today with the internet and the ubiquitous smartphone, parenting information is very easily accessible. So our panel of experts have put together and shortlisted and recommended 10 parenting apps which parents can fall back on for reliable and curated parenting information.
Yes, and it's very important. The two magazines complement each other because this is about education in education institutions. This is about equally important education that happens at home.
Yes.
I think the two have to be seen together.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you.